Hey, how's it going? Li Flies Mike here, and if you want to win a Mickelson's epoxy baitfish that I've tied up and will be talking about here in this video, then just leave a comment down below, like the video, and be subscribed to the channel. So subscribe if you're new here. And we'll pick a comment with a random comment picker here in a couple weeks on a live stream, and I'll make sure to respond asking for a shipping address. All right, let's get into the video. Hey, how's it going? Mike from Li Flies Mike here, and today we're going to be taking a look inside my Albi fly box. That's right, it's September, October, it's that time of year. Even though we had a pretty good start to our Albi season somewhat early in September, it's kind of slowed down. But I've been taking my time every once in a while in between my commercial orders to tie a couple flies here and there. So we've been filling up the fly box with some Albi and Bonito flies, some Spanish mackerel flies, and all of this stuff works for striped bass, of course. So I'm going to show you some of my favorite flies that I've been using over the past 20 years here for false albacore. Really, the past 10 years or so is when I've really gotten serious with false albacore fishing here on Long Island. So let's take a look inside the fly box. All right, let's crack into the box here. So I cleaned out the same box from our video that I'll put up top over here. A look inside a commercial fly tires fly box, and this is just a cheap fly box I think I got off eBay years ago, and we've got it filled up for the Albi season here. So we've got pretty much a collection of some of my favorite Albi flies. Now there is some oddballs on the left, but we'll get to those here in a little bit. So I think we'll focus on the right side here, as this is kind of my mainstay and my go-to Albi flies that I've been using for pretty much over the past 10 years or so. I would say probably, I have to look back and see now, but I want to say maybe it was 2016 or 17, some point I started really getting into Albi fishing and experimenting and seeing what sort of flies worked best for me. And I didn't really follow a lot of what other people were doing at the time. A lot of people were using smaller flies, but you'll see there's a mix of some larger flies here, because I kind of found at times that it was not always the best thing to just copy what everyone else was doing, essentially on the inlet. But essentially what we have here on the right side we'll go over. Starting off on the right side here, we have some of, we're going to be making a video on this, and I don't have a ton of these in here because I actually lost a couple while fishing recently, but we have rabbit flies. Now there's a couple different rabbit flies, but I'd say probably the one that taught me the most about working with rabbit hair in general when I was younger is the Bonito bunny. So the great thing about the Bonito bunny is it's almost entirely tied with rabbit strips. Regular rabbit strip off the back. We have palmered rabbit off the front here with some crystal flash and a little mono loop or a mono piece going through the rabbit hair or rabbit strip to prevent it from fouling. And this is probably one of the first flies that I actually learned how to tie with rabbit hair, specifically. And I wasn't even fishing for Albies as much at the time as more so for striped bass. And this is a great fly altogether for pretty much any saltwater species we have up here. But there's something about rabbit strip flies and false albacore and Bonito where it's just a match made in heaven. I don't know what it is about rabbit flies, but there's something about the movement of the material in the water that for some reason just seems to entice a strike with these hardtails, whether it be Spanish mackerel, Bonito, false albacore, any of these sort of pelagic fall run fish that we get here on the Northeast. So they're just one of my favorite flies, and they also work for everything else, because you'll be fishing for false albacore, you'll be catching tons of striped bass by accident when you're fishing up on the North Shore, for instance. So these are just fantastic flies, and I wanted to start off with these because they were some of the earliest Albi flies that I learned how to tie, as well, of course, some of the classics that you'll see. Now, another honorable mention here is the rabbit strip zonker fly, the Albi zonker. I tied these up for a captain out in Montauk, Captain Merritt White, and he swears by these. He says they're great, and I've had a couple other people reach out to me recently and tell me that they whipped some of these up for Albi season and they've been catching a ton of fish. So unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of fish close to the rocks for me to have a good opportunity. But that being said, There's something about these rabbit strip flies. So this is kind of I wouldn't call it simpler, but there's definitely, it sinks a little bit quicker, and it's a little bit easier to deal with overall because you're not palmering rabbit strip. You're just wrapping some estaz on here. So we have 2 videos for these as well. All these flies we're going to be covering, we pretty much have videos for. There's a couple we probably don't, which we will get to in the future, but pretty much every fly in this box we've covered in a video at some point. So next up is probably one of the most favorite Albie flies here on Long Island, and it was developed by a Long Island fly tyer, and that is Glenn Mickelson's epoxy baitfish. Now this fly, along with the surf candy, were the flies that really honed my skills with epoxy and forced me to learn how to work on getting nice even bodies on epoxy style flies. Nowadays we have things like UV resin, and you could see even with UV resin, it's not always easy to get the perfect body on here. So what you're going to see a lot of times is these are flies that I was tying for guides, and perhaps I put a little too much resin on the body, or it wasn't a perfect profile. So I end up just taking these and throwing them in my box. Some of them look nice and clean, but some of them are also just like the rejects, because guess what? The fish don't care whether they're pretty or not. As long as they the right profile and you're presenting it right, they'll eat it. So again, this fly was developed by Glenn Mickelson here on Long Island, and when I first started fly fishing for false albacore seriously in my probably mid-20s, I would say, or early 20s, somewhere around then, this was the #1 fly that everyone was catching fish on from the rocks. And he was still tying these flies commercially at the time for local places like Whitewater Outfitters, but he's not doing that anymore. So again, these are one of my favorite flies. I remember reading articles in Saltwater Fly Fishing Magazine or Fly Fishing in Saltwater, because there were 2 different articles with very similar names, and it showed this particular fly off and was talking about fall run blitzes in Montauk. And I remember there's a photo of striped bass blitzing pretty much on the shore, and somebody was fly fishing, catching them from shore with this fly, and you could see the lighthouse underneath. And I was reading it during a SAT final or some sort of final in middle school or like high school, and I vividly remember that. For some reason that's ingrained in my mind. So this fly holds a special place in my heart because it really helped me hone my skills, along with the surf candy, which we're going to get to. It really helped me hone my skills with UV resin and epoxy, and it turned out to be one of the best, most reliable, I would say, and like fish producing epoxy style flies that we fish for false albacore with. So you're going to see a lot of people on Long Island fishing with these, especially on the east end. Unfortunately, it doesn't commercially tie anymore, Glenn Mickelson, but people still tie these, and I tie these as well. And I think this one right here, perhaps, this one may have been tied by a friend of mine, by my buddy Jeff, that you see, that we go fishing with. So he loves these things. These are one of the only flies he fishes with for false albacore. I like mixing it up. I broadened his horizons a little bit. And you've seen this is the, again, this is probably one of the rejects because the shape's a little off, but this is the guide style that we tie for Captain Paul Dixon, where it's got the craft fur and the crystal flash on here. Now you're going to see a trend. All of these are pretty much smaller baitfish flies. A lot of them are imitating either silver sides or bay anchovies being the #1 bait. This is something we're going to be going in depth, I'm making a video I'm working on. It's a very long video about fly fishing for false albacore from shore, and then at some point later on I'll do one from boats. But it's going to pretty much cover everything from baits, from locations to tides to tactics to all that stuff. So I asked a lot of questions recently from you folks on Instagram and on YouTube about false albacore, so we'll be covering all that. But again, all of this stuff is pretty much covering like all of these flies are pretty much encompassing like a pretty broad spectrum of smaller style bait that the false albacore will be eating quite regularly. So I guess we should go, speaking of which, speaking of surf candies, you could see here the feather candy, and this is the more traditional style. It's a little, what do you call it, feather on there. This is the more traditional style synthetic surf candy with the lateral scale that we do. We also tie them in bucktail, we tie them in squimpish hair, you can tie them in a variety of different ways. And these are probably the #1 go-to Albie fly that you'll see everyone fishing. Bob Popovic, rest in peace, designed this fly. It's a fantastic fly. It's very durable. This one's got a crack here. I probably smacked it on the side of the boat like 15, 20 times by now. So they're very durable compared to a lot of other flies. The UV resin is extended, especially back behind the bend of the hook, really helps with preventing the fly from fouling. The last thing you want is your flies fouling when you're fishing for false albacore and they blow up. You may only have a couple shots at it. So it's always important to make sure that your fly line's stretched and your flies don't foul. So the surf candy is great for that because of the UV resin body. It prevents that from fouling, and it does a very good job of imitating baitfish that striped bass, bonito, false albacore, all these different fish eat. The fact that it's so durable that you can catch so many fish on it, and the fact that it does such a good job of imitating a lot of these different baits, it's just one, you have to have surf candies in your box when you're going fishing during the fall run. So again, there's many different styles. My favorite, I would say probably the classic bucktail version is probably one of my favorites, or something that I found out over the years is that this one's kind of beat up, but rabbit strip bucktail versions where you stick a rabbit strip off the tail, you go with bucktail on there, and for some reason, we're mixing two classic flies here. We got like a Bonito bunny, but mixed with a surf candy, and there's something about this thing, man. Some of the biggest albies I've ever caught were on rabbit strip surf candies. I don't know if there's a correlation to that or not. Who knows? But again, one of my favorites, and you really can't go wrong because you can manipulate, you can tie them in different ways. You can tie them in different ways to where they're sand eels all the way down to anchovies. You can tie them even with a little bit of a larger profile with the right hook and get something like a smaller peanut bunker, if you will. So it's a very versatile fly. And I've probably, when it comes to the amount of flies that people have ordered over the years for Albies, it's got to be synthetic surf candies, either in pink and white or tan and white with the lateral scale, supreme hair. No joke, I've probably tied well over 10,000 by now. So fantastic fly, and you can't go wrong with the surf candies. And again, most of these flies are all going to be fished very, very similarly, right? They're going to be stripped, whether medium or fast, and whether you're on the rocks or on the beach, whether it's blitzing or blind casting, they're all going to be fished very similarly. I'm not going to get into essentially each fly. I will say certain points, like in terms of how the fly swims, a lot of these epoxy flies are pretty similar. Half of the body is covered in UV resin, right? And when you're using these synthetic materials, there's not always the most life in them. So even these little Mickelsons, bucktail sticking 2 inches off the back of the fly is, it's not going to have a ton of movement in it. So that being said, they're very effective flies. It's really up to you whether you want to go with a more natural approach or you want to go with a more synthetic approach, right? Now, there is certain flies where the materials very much do so impact the way that it swims, like the rabbit strip flies. The next one is the Albi escort, the Albi lot lizard, the Albi of the night, which is the classic fly, which I'm not going to say the name on YouTube because it hates it. But shout out, by the way, that recent video we did very well analytics-wise and got a ton of views. So thank you so much, everyone that watched that Albi escort video. But this fly was developed by Richard Regan on Long Island. It's a classic pattern. It's tied with hot glue. So you can tie this with UV resin. People were asking me in the comment section of that video. You can do that, but I wouldn't because it's so cool. The hot glue makes it the fly, really, in my opinion. The weight of the hot glue also affects the way that it swims, and it gives it a nice heavy head on here. It's also a very durable fly in that regard. You got to watch out for the lateral scale falling off, so it's nice to put a little bit of, well, I'll show the video from the time, but it's nice to put a little bit of hot glue right there on the lateral scale. But what's the whole reason behind this fly that separates it apart? Well, it's an attractor fly. They're generally, you can fish them very small. I've tied them in size 4s. I like them in size 1 odds, size 1s, maybe down to a size 2. And they're attractor flies. They're kind of generally all tied with all white feathers. You change the color with the estaz so they stick out. And the other thing is the feathers have a ton of movement in them. So if I show you some of the older ones, because this is tied with Chinese saddle hackle, which still works great. But I mean, just look at the tail. The tail is going to be doing this the whole time while you're stripping it. And this right here is the sort of action in a fly that kind of entices a fish like a false albacore to eat. So it's very nice to have the feathers in there. Now I will show you though, if you do have some stiffer hackle, it gets even more extreme, and I really like this. This is the old American whiting rooster hackle, but you see it's got even more of a splay to it, because what you do is you don't tie the feathers curve in, the feathers are tied curve out. So you can see with all of the Albi escorts, the feathers splay open in the back. And what happens is you get this little kicking motion as you're stripping it. The feathers are kind of doing this sort of action. So I really do think a fly like this, one of the reasons why it works so well is it doesn't always 1-for-1 match a baitfish like a Mickelson would, for instance, if you hold it up next to a bay anchovy, right? But the thing is that it's more of an attractor fly, and it sticks out, it gets their attention, and then the action of the fly kind of seals the deal, right? Is kind of how I see it, at least. If you are intimidated by the hot glue tying, you really shouldn't be. It's very simple. Go to the hardware store, get a cheap hot glue gun, a tiny one. Just be careful, don't burn yourself, and just use minimal amounts of it. But I don't know, it's fun. It's a completely different way to tie flies, and we're gonna have to experiment more with the hot glue. But the Albi escort's one of my favorites. So it's, again, my buddy Jeff, all he fished was these Mickelsons. One day we were out in Montauk, and he wasn't catching anything, and I was slamming him on these things. So he tied one on, and we caught so many fish that day. And there was just something about the second these things hit the water, there was so much bait, it was so hard to get the fish's attention, but you chucked one of these big white Albi escorts in front of them and they just slammed it. So again, you can't go wrong with those things. Now if we move to the bottom here, we got some more like random stuff. Some of these though are a little bit more rooted in tradition, and one of these flies is like by one of my favorite fly tires, which I think is like, he probably isn't as well known nowadays by some of the younger generation. But all right, so first though, we're going to start off with Jamie Boyle's Boilermaker. Now, I personally haven't fished this fly a ton, but I've had a lot of people tell me that this fly is extremely productive. And I can kind of see why. I've caught a bunch of bass on these, but I've yet to really commit a day of Albi fishing with one of these. But you have a piece of either monofilament you can tie them with, or you can tie just this sort of older style Mylar flex, you know? This is almost like before Easy Body was a thing. We had this Mylar like this. You can tie this on off the back. It's not very likely to foul. It's pretty stiff. If you're worried about it, you can stick mono through there. And this gives you this nice sort of lateral line right down the middle. Even sticking out the back, you get this sort of Mylar tail, which is in itself going to be attracting the fish. But it's pretty foul proof as well. It's got essentially just like craft fur tied on. You want to make sure you tie the craft fur on at lengths to where it's not going to foul very easily. So you don't want the craft fur tied full length. You want it tied to somewhere about here to where when you're casting it, it'll fix itself. But again, these are great flies. They're very simple, and they have a great profile, like especially if the fish are on something a little bit, something with like a little bit more of a profile, like juvenile snappers we had recently. The fish were eating juvenile bluefish, and a fly like this, or even like peanut bunker, it perfectly kind of covers that size and profile, if you will. But it also does a great job with things like anchovies and silver sides. So, it really depends how much material you put on the fly and whatnot. But I wanted to show this fly off. I don't think we actually have a tutorial of this. We're starting to get to the point to where there's so many videos on the channel now that I'm trying to remember if we have one. I don't think we do, so we'll have to cover this at some point. But I did want to do some more testing with it before we do make a video on it. All right, so now, one of my favorite fly tires growing up from New England was David Skoke. Okay, and he's from Massachusetts, and he was also a Martha's Vineyard Derby winner, if I'm not wrong. And I think he won like the biggest false albacore, the biggest bluefish, I think it was, maybe, or the biggest bonito. So it was definitely like the biggest false albacore and the biggest bonito, either in 1 year or the 1 year after the next. And he caught them on the fly when everyone else was spin fishing. So, David Skoke, he's a very amazing fly fisherman and a fly tire. And one of my favorite flies he's ever developed is the Mushmouth. So this fly is pretty simple. We tied these on stream the other night. I probably could have got some of the proportions for the angel hair a little better. We have a video on this fly as well. But what you essentially do is you take a piece of Supreme hair, you then cover it in either some liquid fusion, which I did, or an extremely toxic glue called Softex, which I don't use anymore, which is what he used to use. And this creates a spine. And what this does here is this stops the fly from fouling. Something you see with all these really good Albie flies that people use is either there's hot glue on the feathers, there's UV resin on the body, there's mono loops on the rabbit, or there's something like liquid fusion on the synthetic tail. And all of these things are to stop the fly from fouling, because that's one of the most important things. Run and gun Albie fishing, you don't want it to foul. So you have your spine to stop it from fouling, and then you have all this angel hair, which is literally ultra fine flash. So it's a very flashy fly, but there's something about it. It, a lot of saltwater flies can have, very minimal flash at times, and which is a style of fly tying that I really do enjoy, like Kenny Abrams flies. But there's something about this Mushmouth. It's when it comes to flashy flies, this is my favorite. So, and I mean, he caught his, I remember, again, in one of those saltwater fly fishing magazines, I remember seeing the photo of him holding a giant Albie with I think a blue and white version of one of these in its mouth, if I'm not wrong. It could have been a different color. It might have been the yellow and white, but, and a lot of my fly tying growing up was very influenced by Chris Windrum and his website, saltwaterflies.com, because, when we first got computers in the internet back in like I guess it was like the late 90s, maybe like 96, 97 or something, or it was like 95, I think. I don't know. But it was early on. And then Chris Windrum started his site in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I would use that website to look at a lot of flies, like Dave Skokes flies, Chris Windrum stuff, or Bob Popovic. He had all these different flies, and there were also flies he was selling. So I was able to very high detail photos for the time. And I was able to take a look and kind of replicate these flies. So I remember doing that as a kid. But again, David Skokes, fantastic fly tyer. And the Mushmouth, something you should try at some point. It's a very interesting fly. And it's all you need is some angel hair and some Supreme hair, or some Win and Flash or something like that. So I don't know. There's just something to it. You know what I mean? Maybe it's more nostalgia than anything, but it is a great fly. So every once in a while, it's nice to have some flashy flies. So some more oddballs, little kinky muddlers. This is going to be this is a sneak peek of what we're talking about a little bit later, but this is one we tied recently, and I do think these flies are very important for Albie fishing. We'll get to that though. Now, again, this is pretty much tied into the UV resin. This is again another reject here, but the body doesn't need to be perfect for the Albies to eat it. Easy body candies, fantastic flies. Very easy to tie because you just tie your bucktail on top and bottom at the front. You slip your easy body on it and you just glue it. So very good flies. I don't use them enough. I should, but it's a very convenient way of tying like a surf candy style fly. And then these are like little blonde flies that we tied up for the UV resin video, but you can catch Albies on very simple stuff like this. I've seen a lot of old school guys out on the rocks. They are like driving like an old Toyota pickup truck. This dude's like 70 years old. He's probably been fishing for a long time. And he'll whip out something super simple like this and just start slaying fish. So don't count off simple looking flies because it's really not too far off from a lot of this stuff. And it's really about the presentation you're fishing, more so than which color surf candy you're using, in my opinion. But all right, so this is the general sort of Albie flies that you'll be fishing with throughout the season. Now, I want, this is a good point. This might be a good point in the video. If you guys, what are some of your favorite Albie flies that you use throughout the season, if there's something that we didn't cover here? And also, what is your favorite colors for Albies? Because that seems to be not decisive, but it seems to be a very, like, a lot of people have different opinions when it comes to colors. My favorite, pink and white. That's my all-time favorite. It's what I've caught my most fish on. Some of my biggest fish, and that's I'll say that to the day I die. I love pink and white for surf candies and all that. But I'm curious what you folks fish with. So now on the opposite side of the board, it's not very often we use these sort of styles of flies, but it is important to have clousers. You can catch Albies on clousers. I've caught them while striper fishing. That being said as well, jiggies. I think jiggies are probably better in my opinion, just because you have less obstruction from the dumbbell eyes. So it's easier for the fish to grab it because they're not necessarily like a striped bass. Their mouths only open so big. So when they're coming at that thing like a freight train, you want your best chance of hooking these things. So sometimes I feel like these clouser minnows and these dumbbell eyes, while they work for a weighted fly, I think it's better to fish with something like a jiggy, to be honest with you. I think it's more streamlined. I personally like jiggies more than clousers nowadays. This one's old and beat up, but they just fish better in my opinion. They don't foul as easy because this right here, it just fixes itself every time. I don't know why. I love it. And Popovic did catch some Albies and Bonito on these things he was talking about in his book Pop Flies. So I do love the jiggies. I haven't fished with them as much, but if you are maybe trying to get deeper down in the water column while you're blind casting, you only have a floating line or something, I would use jiggies as opposed to clousers. But you can catch them on these weighted flies. That being said as well, rabbit strip jiggies. Now this might be the secret sauce. This might be the secret sauce right here, these rabbit strip jiggies. Because now we're combining rabbit strips and some of that jiggy motion. So I don't know, that's something I need to try in the future. Let me know if you folks have been using any sort of weighted flies for Albies. So we got some bendback styles. So you here we've tied on stream and on videos. Now I stuck these in the box here. You ideally don't want to do that because I wouldn't keep these in here, but I figured for the video it's going to look cool. Let's take them out now. This is a good time to talk about it. Flies like this, you probably don't want to keep them in a box, especially because of the angle of the bend back. So this is a hook that we bent. The materials help turn the fly over so it swims with the hook point up, which is great for shallow conditions. There are times where Albies can be on the flats or in very shallow waters or around rocks, for instance. This is where it's good to have something like this, right? If you're fishing up on the North Shore of Long Island, for instance, you could tie some smaller bend backs and they'll work perfectly well. But when you're storing these flies, you don't want to put them in the box because they'll put a crease in them. Something like this, you can put in a bag or something, and it'll keep the profile of the fly better. But there are many times that Albies will eat larger baits. And this is one of the reasons why you're seeing some of these larger flies here. Not only something like the bend back, but I want to show you because we'll speak about the elephant in the room, these larger style of flies. Two different flies here. We pretty much have, this is what I would call an offshore style deceiver. This is something that I would tie for like bluefin tuna, or like mahi. It's tied on a pretty serious hook. But if you take something like this and scale this down ever so slightly, it turns into a perfect Albie fly. Because there are times where something like this kinky muddler by Johnny Keynes, or this sort of offshore style deceiver, I'll call it, where it's just, when I say that, it's pretty much a regular deceiver, but it's just, it's got a certain profile and shape to it that reminds me of these sort of tuna flies. One of the reasons why you would use something like this is because I'll show you a video, but there are times where false albacore eat larger bait, things like mullet, things like juvenile bunker, like, smaller, where they're a little bit larger than peanut bunker, things like half beaks. Yes, half beaks. And I'm talking about big half beaks. Maybe not the size you would use for like marlin bait or, swordfish bait, but like 5 to 6 inch half beaks was one of the craziest bites we ever had. Middle of the rain. It was when my boat was working, the glory days of when my boat was working a year or two ago. And we essentially found this crazy bite, and there were half beaks jumping out of the water. They were getting just pushed left and right. There was a mix of sharks, there was a mix of bluefin tuna, and there was a mix of albies. So we were trying to catch them with smaller flies. It wasn't really working. So what we did is we took a 5-6 inch blue and white deceiver that I tied for stripers, very similar to this, very similar size and everything. And lo and behold, we started catching a ton of fish. So it turned out that they were eating these half beaks. Why or when this sort of feeding happens, when the albies focus on this larger bait, I don't think it's not like every day sort of thing, but there are certain times and conditions where if you don't have larger flies with you for false albacore, you may not catch them. It's very specific, and it's it's less of like an inshore thing. This is more of like a boat when the fish are feeding from anywhere from 30 foot of water to 120 foot of water. So, but it is worth mentioning that for false albacore. So keep some larger flies with you. There's a guide I'm tying for out in Montauk, Captain Ernie French, and we're tying 5 dozen kinky muddlers specifically for false albacore fishing, and striped bass as well. Of course, they work perfectly for bass. So you can see here these two odd kinky muddlers. These are the exact sort of size and flies that you want to be fishing for albies. Juvenile mullet, little bunker, things like that, herring, snapper, bluefish that they're eating. And you'd be surprised. It looks like a pretty big fly, but it's one way to definitely get on the bigger albies when you find them eating this sort of bait. So something worth mentioning. And then we got some deceivers, just basic little, this is like a basic classic sort of striper deceiver. It's like a classic sort of striper deceiver. You will catch them on stuff like this. So something I don't have here, but I believe we do have a video on it, is Mickelson Slim Deceiver, where it's just a slimmed down version. And then something like the bunny deceiver as well. We were using this recently. I actually caught some fish on this the other day in the shallows and the flats, and they work great. You know, you just got to make sure they don't foul. We were still having some issues even with the loop. So somebody mentioned what you could do. Actually, we're gonna have to try it, is take the rabbit strip and tie it in a different way. Like tie the rabbit and strip in first, then tie the mono loop over it, and then pull the rabbit strip through it. So that's pretty interesting. We may need to try that, but all right, well, there we go. There's quite a wide variety of some Albie flies that we had here. If I missed anything, or if there's any flies that you guys enjoy that you didn't see here, let me know, and let the fellow Albie fishers in the comments section below know what you're fishing, so that way we can all become better Albie fishers together and Bonito fishers. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of Bonito down here on Long Island on the South Shore, and if we do, we would really only see ones that were probably like 5 inches long, 6-7 inches long. They were generally no more bigger than half a pound. But I'm hoping that changes in the future. So all you folks up in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, don't take your Bonito for granted, all right? Because I've never even seen a Bonito probably over 2 pounds in person in all my years. A lot of bigger Albies though. So maybe that'll change one day, but we're just happy to have a pretty decent Albie fishery here on the island. But thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. And if you're looking, we have pretty much tying tutorials for all of these videos, so you can check that out here on the channel. And you should be good to go and fill your Albie box for the season. All right, well, my name is Mike from LI Flies Mike. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great season out there this year. Go catch some Albies and Bonito from the rocks. If you're new here to the channel, we have fly fishing and fly tying videos coming out every week. We have live fly tying on Friday nights and early access for members, as well as emotes, sub badges, and all sorts of stuff like that. So thank you so much for watching, and till next time, have a great season out there this year, and tight lines.